Hi there, I'm Guy Gillespie. I've been involved with the Super Home now for some 5 years, I think. I would. We got involved with the Super Home movement back when I helped start a previous company which specialised in passive house construction. And I've since sold out of that, and Character Builders, my company, we started that back in 1997, and so it has been our building company. My wife and I, Jo, my wife, is really the talent here. I'm just the guy doing the jobs, and we started that company with a heart for old homes, and so we've spent the last 2.5 decades I guess refurbishing, repairing, restoring, building new in an old style. And so we've always particularly enjoyed period style architecture that is defined by a specific era. And so for many years we built 1920s style homes. We repaired villas and did restoration in these old homes, and over time we built up quite a bit of knowledge, I guess, of what it means to have an old home, a home that was really built well for its day, in its time, with great materials, with architecture that stood the test of time. In more recent years, as we joined in with Super Home and as we started to acquire knowledge around energy efficient building, I guess we've gravitated and moved a little bit in terms of our preference for style. And so we now still like to define the architecture and the style of the home in a specific time period. We kind of enjoy that. And we've built this home at Ainslie Terrace as a mid-century modern home. And that is an era that it was depicted around about 1960, where some of the old styles and symmetries of some of the earlier buildings was sort of thrown out a wee bit. Everything was streamlined, and things were done differently. And so, for example, in this old home, we call it an old home because it's a style that is now 70 years old, and where they had leaning walls and tapered shapes, and linear kind of aesthetics. And so we've styled it this way. And our designer did a great job of producing a home that to us initially looked a bit interesting. We had to take a second glance at it to really understand what he was trying to achieve. But Jared from AP, he did a great job, and he fitted it onto the site here well, and it gave us the amenities that we wanted. Really, it's just a home that's 160 square metres with the garage included. And that is about 125 square metres of home, which we believe is plenty for us. It has 3 bedrooms, one of which my mum comes and stays 4 times a year. And that's often the case nowadays. We build homes based on previous expectations, and often based on what a real estate agent might have told us, that we need 4 bedrooms and we need big sizes. But really, when it all comes down to it, mum comes to stay 4 times a year. That room doesn't need to be elaborate. And when she comes, we love having her here, but she's not really worried about spending time in that room. So we were content to build a home that has compressed amenities, that has smaller things that really don't matter, but the things that do matter, we really wanted to make a big thing of. And that's what the Super Home movement has led us and refined our thinking around what essentially is the important part of the home. And so as we've progressed over these last 5 years and learned about energy efficiency, we've then come to realize that there are 5 or 6 key principles in building a home that's energy efficient. So as a family, we have since 1994 owned a property, a wider family over on the west coast, And we love the wilderness. And there's something about a family growing up out in the wild where you're being creative and you're finding new things to explore and to build. Always been a practical family. And back in 2020, this property came up at Ainslie, and it was a wilderness, and it reminded us of what we loved about the West Coast. And my two sons and Joe and I, we and their partners, we reached out as far as we could for what we could afford, and we managed to cobble together enough to buy this property, and then we split it up and shared it around, and we began building on it. And next door we have another home which is energy efficient. It's a very simple home that my son and daughter-in-law built, and that will come available to look at some point in time. This home we built last year and we finished it in October. The idea being that it was this old style mid-century home. We didn't have a big budget for it. We'd stretched ourselves a bit thin with the subdivision and the various other things going on, and we built it on a shoestring, I guess you'd say. There were things that really mattered to us, and we weren't going to compromise on those. And so we had triple glazed UPVC joinery for the home. It was important that we end up with a really functional kitchen. And it was important that we had a great heating system, that the house was warm. So we constructed the home with oversized 140mm LVL framing. And that gave us a well above code construction and the ability to insulate well on the walls. But it certainly wasn't a budget option. And so there were some things that were quite key that we had to spend good money on to get right. And then there are other things that didn't matter so much. Well, it didn't matter. It didn't matter in terms of what it looked like. It really mattered in terms of how it functioned. And so, for example, the roofing on this home was a line of colour steel roofing, modern roofing, but it was 5 years old. And it had already had holes in it from a previous use. It was taken off a warehouse. And so we were able to get enough roofing for this whole home at 1/10 of the cost of what it would have been to buy new. It was the wrong colour, and so I sprayed it black because we loved the look of black with timber as an aesthetic. We couldn't afford to pay $30 a metre for Western red cedar, and so I found someone who had some trees for sale, and I bought some logs and had them milled and kiln dried and shaped and run into vertical shiplap weatherboard. And so here we have a Japanese cedar, durable as any. It's a lower grade, it has knots, it has blemishes. And so as a builder, as a carpenter, and loving that sort of craftsman type work, we were able to cut the boards where we needed to and cut out the big knots and create an aesthetic which is truly remarkable. And the main things that you see on this home when you first see it are the old second-hand roof and this timber that we got out of logs, where typically these main things would be a really expensive part of a construction. And so we were able to shrink this part of the budget to quite an extent, saving upwards of $50,000 even just in those two items. There were other things about the home. We found a second-hand set of stairs for $200 instead of paying $2,500 for a set of stairs. The old home that was on the property further up the hill was badly damaged in the earthquakes of 2010, and so it was demolished, and we stripped off the Western red cedar weatherboards that were on it. It was a well-built home, and I put those aside for a couple of years, and then I pulled them out of storage and ran them all through my thicknesser and laminated them together, and we made an amazing stairwell balustrade system that really is quite remarkable, and yet the weatherboards came for free. And it just took my time to repurpose them into something significant and something of a keepsake, I guess, a sort of an ode to the history of this property. These were the things that I really loved about building. The building of this home during 2023 was an enjoyable part of my career. It was the last year of my son Joel's apprenticeship, and so in his final year he ran this project. I was his lackey, his gopher, and as we built it, he learned the finesse, the final bits that he needed in his carpentry training. And so now a qualified tradesman, he has this under his belt, where most young guys don't get that opportunity until well into their career. And so it was an enjoyable year of building for us. Okay, so there are some challenges with renovating an old home. I guess the first principles are work needs to be done well. And in order to achieve a super home status for a renovation, there are certain targets that need to be met. One of the more difficult things to achieve is airtightness. So airtightness in an existing home is quite a challenge. And there are ways of going about this, and one of those ways is to strip back the interior linings and to ensure that the joinery, the windows and doors are sealed into the frame. And then there's going to be the challenge of stopping the air movement inside to out, and a blower door test will test ultimately at the end how many air changes there are at 50 pascals and how often that happens per hour. And so to achieve a super home standard for better in this home, we achieve 2 air movements per hour. In a renovation, that's going to be quite a challenge. It will require an airtight membrane, an Intello membrane on the inside. It will need specific attention around light switches and openings, around bottom plate fixings, ceiling connections. There's a number of things so it's quite a challenge. You've got to have a building company who is committed to that level of detail. And in general terms, there's a great bunch of builders here in Christchurch and throughout New Zealand. They're qualified, they're very capable tradesmen. If they don't understand the principles of super home, of how to achieve high performance and energy efficiency, they may not understand the need to put attention into some details. And while they're doing a great job building, they may not understand things like thermal bridging, where cold transfers through steel or conductive surfaces to the interior, and then creates a problem with temperature control, with the need for depth of insulation, or to eliminate any gaps around the insulation. And there's a number of those things. With renovation is all the more crucial because you're starting with an imperfect frame, and it's difficult. You'll never make it perfect, and so you've got to have a mindset to understand what are the key differences. And let me tell you about the key differences. So with this home, for example, we started off with the foundation. Really important to isolate the foundation from the outside environment, that is from the sides and underneath. And so we applied a 50 mils of polystyrene with a membrane protecting the outside. Foundation is really key. So you start from the bottom. And then the depth of framing, at 140 mils of framing, we can achieve a resistance value of 3.6 insulation. And you could go another step and put a membrane, an interior membrane on that, and then another layer of insulation on the inside. So as you increase that thermal resistance, you increase your performance of your home. The next thing is to eliminate cold corners. That is where, and conventional construction has cold corners, where you have a block of 2 plus 2, often 6 even, framing members in the corner that lock the house together so that it's rigid, but they create often a gap in the back that can't be insulated, or they create a thermal bridge where the cold travels through to the inside, or the heat is lost through from the inside to the outside. And we sought to eliminate those cold corners with this home by doing that, by having open corners so that you have a solid piece of timber one way and a solid piece the other way, and then you're able to insulate on the inside. We eliminated it also by having no horizontal dwangs or nogs through the home. And you can only do that if you use laminated lumber framing, LVL. And that means that the timber is stronger, it's straighter, it runs from top to bottom, and you don't need horizontal dwangs. All the timber in the building creates a form of thermal bridging, and so you eliminate as much of that horizontal as you can. The next thing for us was to install UPVC joinery, and we don't tend to use aluminium joinery. There are options that will give you improved insulation, but we find UPVC or timber are the better options. And we set the joinery into the middle of the wall. So we don't plant it on the outside where the cold can run through from the outside. We set it into the middle, which is it's a modern form of construction. It is super home construction, and it's just a move away from what was done conventionally. The joinery that we have, UPVC, is also triple glazed, and some would say that's an overkill, but we just find that it has a higher resistance value. There's less noise comes through from the outside. When you touch the window on the inside, you don't feel the outside temperature because you have two layers of resistance or air gap in the middle, giving it a high performance. The next thing on this home was that we installed a heat recovery ventilation system. It was just the basic system. It's called a Mitsubishi Losnay. It retrieves fresh air from the inside. It exchanges it with heat that's produced from the inside in the kitchen and shower areas, and it passes it by each other through a series of fins, and so it produces, or it retains, the warmth that you have created, but purifies it through a heat exchanger. And then beyond that, it was important to us to have a heating system that you could feel. And so we installed a warmth underfloor heating system, which is a dual system for efficiency. And so a hot water heat pump heats the water that goes into the hot water cylinder for our potable use for the taps and the appliances inside. That same water is circulated through the flooring system, so it is a dual system. It's maintained pure by one circulation every day, regardless of whether it's on or not. And efficiency-wise, well, a hot water heat pump is 3 times as efficient as a standard electric heat pump. And so this home, right now, we just started autumn. We have just turned on this underfloor heating just so that it is running at a low base level, and you barely see it register in terms of power consumption, but it's just starting to function. And so in the middle of winter, we have no other heating in the home, but you'll feel warm because your feet feel warm, and you can turn that up or down, and depending on what you want. The only other form of heating that we have is a heat pump up on the landing, purely for cooling. One of the principles of a super home is also modeling and managing hot and cold. So the comfort level of the home is the crucial factor here. It's easy to heat a home up by whatever means, or to retain the heat. It's another thing to control it and to get rid of the heat when it's over hot. And so a super home is designed around what is your natural shading, which way how the sun impacts on the rooms, what areas of the home are shaded, what areas are likely to overheat. So all of this is designed ahead of time as part of the super home design. And so this home, in order to run some of the electrical appliances, we have PV solar on the roof. And so with 7 kilowatts of solar on the roof, it means that we generate from the sun as much as we need during the day. We don't contain it in batteries. We use what we can during the day through our appliances, and then we export back to the grid at a reasonable rate, which is actually the same cents per kilowatt as what we pay for night rate power. So when you think about how that functions, if you have excess or surplus solar during the day, you export it back to the grid at, I think, 17 cents a kilowatt. Then at night time, you use it to heat the hot water in the spa pool or the hot water cylinder or underfloor. You're taking it back from the grid then at 17 cents, and the equation is very good. So over the course of a year, now we have only been in here for almost 6 months now. By the time we get to November, we'll know what the total annual cost is for electricity. Right at this point in time, we have something like $250 of credit for sunlight hours that we've been using over the summer. And as we go into winter, we'll start to use that credit up, and there'll come a time when it'll cost us, but then we'll start getting credits again as the year goes on. The annual cost of electricity for this house is likely to be less than $500. It may well even be zero. We haven't tested it, and it'll just depend on how much power we need during the winter time. But that's what you call a high performance home. That's why you have a super home, because we're not losing the energy that we're creating in the home. We're not having the intrusion of cold coming into the home because it's a high performance home. And so your net cost is lower. It might have cost a little bit more to build, but at the end of the day, it costs less to run and is more comfortable and more healthy. It makes sense. Yeah, it makes sense. Not many people build that way. So your conventional building companies and framing providers and hardware suppliers, they haven't moved on this technology. The old way of doing it was, and the building code typically shows framing that's built conventionally with cold corners, with horizontal dwangs, and with non-laminated framing. And so it's only in recent years that these products have come available. And it's only in more recent years that the technology and understanding around thermal bridging has become a thing. It's always been viewed suspiciously by the industry. And yet now we can build a home with these modern materials, being a laminated framing, which really is a framing. It's like a plywood. So it's built in layers. So it doesn't have knots and points of weakness, and it doesn't tend to bow because of these points of weakness, and so it remains straight and rigid. And so you can build your whole frame without having to have these bits in the middle that hold everything straight. So that is, and it's a technology that only the architects who understand thermal bridging and who put a emphasis on that will change. And so, just over recent years, this is the way the industry has started to change. And now it's recognized, the building code recognizes that if you're using LVL framing, you don't have to have horizontal dwangs, provided that you're using a 140 depth of framing, no dwangs are required. But whether that comes through into the design, the architect has to also understand that. And he also has to be committed to wanting to improve the performance of the home. So a super home, I know it's homegrown, and it's kind of it's a Christchurch thing in a way. It started here, and we're sort of among the early adopters. But there is some real science in this. There's some real understanding that's gone into it. And interestingly, when you build a wall with with laminated LVL framing, you build a wall and you add up how much meterage of timber is in that wall, and then you reduce 2, sometimes 3 rows of mid-dwangs. In the end, the timber that cost a bit more, you put less timber in, and so it became more affordable to build that wall. And all that we're lacking therefore is the technology and the determination to change. The building code is on the move. So the building code is changing, and you know why it's changing? It's changing because of pressure from the likes of Superhome and from Passive House, and it's changing because it's now becoming understood that the building code was not performing the way it needs to here in New Zealand. And in some parts of the country, maybe in the further north, in the North Island, maybe it didn't need to change that much. But here, as you get to Christchurch and further south, we really do need homes that perform well. The building code has been slow to change, but it is changing. And there are new aspects of the building code that are lifting the level of insulation required. They're not mandatory at this stage, but that's recognising what the Superhome movement have been saying for the last 5 years, that there needs to be change. And legislation changes things, but it's very slow to change legislation. And so it just takes time. And we are building homes ahead of our time, but there'll come a time when these are normal, these are standard. It will be recognised that it's normal to have a home with a high degree of insulation, to use non-conductive windows and doors, to have greater thermal resistance in the windows, to have floor slabs that are insulated, to have ventilation systems and inbuilt heating, and that is cost effective to run. So these things, they're catching up. We don't mean to be arrogant about this, but it's technology that we've come across that we need to be adopting. It just makes sense, and we're getting there. I guess the Kiwi psyche is to have your own quarter acre or your own bit of land, your own garden, your own environment. And I understand that, but now there's a real constraint around affordability, and there is a real need to think outside the square. And so for a young couple, for example, it's really important to value stuff that is a bit different from before. And so, as an example, you can build a home that is really well built and built with a long-term view in mind. You can build that home and put a second-hand $2,000 kitchen in it. That might be 5 years you might have to endure that kitchen. And in time you'll be able to improve that when you can afford it. But I think we have to get away from wanting everything now and expecting everything to be perfect, when quality of life doesn't come from those perfections. It comes from your environment and from your community and your sense of well-being. And you're better to keep your debt lower, and so have a better positive frame of mind around your current life, to live a bit more frugally, to accept something that's imperfect, like an old kitchen, and to do it that way round, so that you're not loading yourself up with a debt that you can't really carry. Start small, and don't build a house like everyone tells you it has to be 200 square meters. Build a home that's 100 square meters, and just be content with small stuff, realizing that the real value is in the people that you love, and your frame of mind. So to me, it takes a bit of a paradigm shift away from perhaps what your average real estate agent might tell you, that I don't mean to be derogatory, but the industry tells you that you have to have a certain level or elevation. I think we've got to take a step back and say, okay, what is the most important thing here?